Well, it's official, guys. American right-wing reactionary Bill Maher has come out in official support of land back. But land back for whom, you might ask? Is it land back for the thousands of Native Americans living in reservations in Bill Maher's own country, the United States of America? Or land back for European people who may or may not have a tinge of Jewish ancestry in the Middle East?
Colonizers. Okay, this has become like in the media, we just call the Israelis, it's not a colonizing.
No.
But okay, colonizer is when one country that had nothing to do with another country, like the British or the Dutch in South Africa, marched in with an army and took over a place that they had no connection to. Israel has quite a connection to Israel.
Jews are the...
yes.
Yes, so many people commenting about this seem to have just started their understanding of it from 5 minutes ago. The Jews are the Native Americans of this piece of land.
Yes, if you did a land acknowledgement like we do in this country, where I'm standing on ground that was, I'm standing on ground that 3,000 years ago was King David's capital of Jerusalem.
It's important, who does Hamas and many Palestinian sympathetic people, who do they refer to as settlers and colonizers? It's not just the Israelis living in the disputed West Bank. It's Israelis living anywhere within the internationally recognized borders of the State of Israel. Because to them, any Jew in that territory is considered a colonizer. And this language is used to dehumanize people and to license their murder.
Well, isn't it rich how the most bloodthirsty American neocons can suddenly start sounding like the bleeding heart woke moralists that they decry when it concerns land back in Palestine? Yes, the most savage, vicious, and vile American reactionaries suddenly start sounding like bleeding heart woke moralists when it concerns land back for European people claiming to be Jewish. I mean, have you seen some of these Israeli settlers before? Look at them! Look at the guy on the far left. He looks like Caleb Maupin. White as a cheesecake, for God's sake. And apparently, in the State of Israel, you can be some blonde-haired, blue-eyed hilly-billy from New York, and they will let you in as long as you claim to be Jewish and you speak Hebrew. Yes, that's right. But here's the thing, before you start calling me anti-Semitic, well, you can't really call me anti-Semitic because even rabbis around the world hate the State of Israel, right? They consider it to be an illegitimate state because you're not supposed to form a nation state until the Messiah comes, right? Even if you're going to call me anti-Semitic, you're not really going to intimidate me because plenty of Jewish people around the world, real Jewish people, I might add, such as Gabo Mate and Norman Finkelstein, oppose the State of Israel, right? And in fact, there are many Zionist people, such as Winston Churchill and Arthur Balfour, who are not even Jewish, but who think that the State of Israel must be supported because it is there where the Armageddon will take place, and therefore the Jewish people basically are only the tools by which they achieve Armageddon. But even if we're going to ignore blood quantum, right? Let's say we're going to ignore the one-drop rule and say that, oh well, you know what, even if you have some European blood, even if you're 90% European, you can still claim to be a native on the State of Israel. The fact of the matter is that if you migrated, or in this case were forcefully thrown out by the Romans, right, 1,800 years ago, and you lived in the diaspora for nearly 2,000 years, and you assimilated into European culture as many more secular Jewish people did, right, then you cannot claim to be culturally Middle Eastern, right? See, there's a very distinct difference between the Native Americans on reservations, I might add, in Bill Maher's own country, who are still living in reservations and who still have not gotten their land back and who still have not achieved economic justice, and a well-fed Israeli settler from New York, no less, who can get a place on a Palestinian person's piece of land just because that person claims to be Jewish, right? Or has some Jewish ancestry. Look, if I have a little bit of Korean ancestry, which I might, does it mean that I get to evict someone in Korea who might be an ethnic minority? Well, to be fair, Korea might not be a good example, you see, so because you know that Korea is 99% Korean. Okay, let's take China as an example. Okay, China is a better example. Now, I'm a Peranakan, which means that I have a lot of Chinese ancestry, right? Now, do I have therefore a right to evict a Mongolian family from their home and basically sit on their land just because I have more ancestral connection to the land? No, I do not. Because I came here 400 or 500 years ago. Let me rephrase that. My sailor man ancestor came here 400 or 500 years ago, basically assimilated into the Malaysian way of life. There wasn't a Malaysia back then. Let's just say the Southeast Asian way of life, right? And, you know, I don't speak Mandarin. I don't speak any Chinese dialect whatsoever. But even if I did speak perfect Mandarin or perfect Hokkien or Cantonese or Hakka or whatever, it wouldn't give me the right to evict an ethnic minority in China who has been living there for 10 generations any more than it gives you, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white man from New York, like David Pacman, the right to evict a Palestinian person who has been living there for at least 10 generations. Because these Zionist reactionaries like Bilma, who are not even Jewish in most cases, they like to play this game of, you know, how the Jewish people are the true natives of the land, because this is where the kingdom of David really was. Although, you know, we don't even know if David really existed, you know. I mean, at the same time, I don't even know if Zeus really existed, okay? It's funny how these right-wing, all these secular centrists, like Bilma, who keep going on about how religion is bad, suddenly start supporting a religious state based on religious fables, right? But anyway, here's the thing. I don't have any more connection to the land of China than an ethnic minority from Mongolia or Uzbekistan who's been living there for 10 generations, right? Because I have been here for longer than 10 generations, right? And when you look at the European diaspora who have assimilated into European ways of life, how connected are they to the land of Israel, right? Now, they could be religiously Jewish, yes. They might attend Jewish festivities and participate in Jewish religious activities like Ben Shapiro does. But to pretend that Ben Shapiro is more culturally Middle Eastern than a Palestinian person who's been living on the land for 10 generations, perhaps even more if you're to believe Gabo Mate's theory. You know, the Palestinians are the descendants of the Jewish people who never left, right? To pretend that someone like Ben Shapiro, who touts the supremacy of Western civilization and Western values, has any more connection to the land of Palestine than a Palestinian person who has been there for 10 generations is simply a very American thing to do, you see, because you are not entitled to call yourself Middle Eastern just because you practice a Middle Eastern religion any more than a Western Christian in America, like an evangelical Christian, has a right to call himself Middle Eastern or culturally Middle Eastern just because he practices Christianity, right? Because culture, you see, is more than just skin deep. Now look, Zio-Saxons, you guys may be religiously Jewish or not even religious at all, but you are culturally European. And I apply the same standard, the same logic to Asian Americans and African Americans, right? You know, these people are culturally Western as well, right? And just like I cannot be said to be fully culturally Chinese, I'm culturally Malaysian, even though I'm ethnically Chinese, you see. So the thing is, culture is a lot more than just anything that goes beyond skin deep, right? The Jewish people who had lived in Palestine before Zionism even came about in the 19th century can be said to be culturally European, right? But a Jewish person from Europe, a European Jewish person like Theodore Herzl, cannot be said to be culturally Middle Eastern, right? Because Zionists fundamentally come from the Western diaspora. Now, in theory, it's supposed to let Jewish people from all over the world come back, right? Which would also include Jewish people from the Philippines or Jewish people from Africa, right? But if you look at Israeli propaganda videos, you will notice that the feel of these videos is very, very European. Like they're trying to project a European sort of image to the world. And let's not beat about the bush now. Let's not beat about the bush. It's a lot easier to come back and claim ancestry in Israel if you're lighter skinned, right, than if you're a black person, right? They might have a couple of token blacks, but you know, fundamentally it's a lot easier to achieve, you know, or to migrate back to Israel. I shouldn't even say migrate back to Israel, because your homeland is the West, right? If you're a white person, than if you're a black Hebrew, right? Yes, let's not beat about the bush in that regard. And furthermore, the fact of the matter is that, yeah, if you are culturally European and you go back to the so-called motherland, there are bound to be clashes with the locals, right? That sort of thing is inevitable. Like what happened in Liberia, what would happen if many Asian Americans who are culturally American came back to Asia and clashed with the locals because they had a Western worldview, right? The same thing is happening right before our eyes. People clash, Zionists or culturally European Jewish people, if I may call them Jewish people, are clashing with the local Palestinians because fundamentally the Palestinian locals are still culturally Middle Eastern. But the Zionist Jewish people, on the other hand, are culturally European. You think I'm making this up? Let's see what Theodore Herzl has to say about it in his book, The Jewish State.
Palestine is our ever-memorable historic home. The very name of Palestine would attract our people with a force of marvelous potency. If His Majesty the Sultan were to give us Palestine, we could in return undertake to regulate the whole finances of Turkey. We should there form a portion of a rampart of Europe against Asia, an outpost of civilization, as opposed to barbarism. We should, as a neutral state, remain in contact with all Europe, which would have to guarantee our existence. The sanctuaries of Christendom would be safeguarded by assigning to them an extraterritorial status, such as is well known to the law of nations. We should form a guard of honor about these sanctuaries, answering for the fulfillment of this duty with our existence. This guard of honor would be the great symbol of the solution of the Jewish question after 18 centuries of Jewish suffering.
Now look, when you say that the Jewish people are natives to the land of Palestine, you know, I would not go against that point. In fact, I would be nodding my head in agreement. However, they actually have to be culturally Jewish, culturally Middle Eastern, and not culturally European, you see. Because, you know, just like Asian Americans are not native to Asia, they're native to America. I am not native to China, I'm native to Malaysia. Well, European Zio-Saxons are not native to the land because they have undergone an immense cultural change through no fault of their own, unless you think there's something wrong with being culturally European, that they have taken on the characteristics of the European, right? And as Theodore Herzl even admits in his book, what he wanted to create was a rampart for Europe, an outpost of civilization as opposed to barbarism. Read his words again. An outpost of civilization as opposed to barbarism. Yes, I don't think Herzl was thinking about black Jewish people. I don't think he had black Jewish people in mind when he said that, right? You see, the thing is that the fact of the matter is that Zionism, or I should say the founders of Zionism, were fundamentally European, colonial minded, right? They were culturally European, and they originated in Europe, and there was no such thing as Zionism before the 19th century, right? Zionism is not something that goes back hundreds of years. But guess what? Even before Zionism, there were Palestinians, even if they might not have called themselves by that name, because mind you, there are going to be reactionaries like Bill Maher who will say, no, 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 these are migrants, pendatang, as they say in my country, who came from Syria or Jordan or Lebanon, and they should go back to those Arab countries. The fact of the matter is that even if this were true, which I question that it is true, even if it were true that they came from Syria or Jordan or Lebanon, they developed their own distinct culture that is different from the culture of Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon, right? You can't just expect them to assimilate into Syrian, Jordanian, or Lebanese culture any more than you can expect a Chinese, a Korean, or a Japanese to seamlessly assimilate into each other's cultures. Yes, while they all come from the same root, just like all Arabic people theoretically come from the same root, their cultures are vastly different. So to say that they can just go back to Syria or Jordan or Lebanon, these pendatang can go back to Syria, Jordan or Lebanon, it's like saying that, well, a Malaysian Chinese can theoretically just go back to China and assimilate. Because guess what? Zionism and Ketuanan Melayu, which is Malay supremacy, are basically two sides of the same coin. Yes, I know that Zio-fascists, because most Jewish rabbis around the world hate the state of Israel, right? Zio-fascists and Islamo-fascists don't necessarily get along with each other, but they have a lot in common, right? The idea that this nation should only be for one particular group of people, and the pendatang, or the migrants, should just go back home to where they came from, even if they came to this land hundreds of years ago, and you know, basically importing a European Jewish person over, you know, who's culturally European, would be like, you know, basically bringing over a Malay American chap from New York who's never been to Malaysia, you know, and basically kicking me out and basically giving him my land, which is basically fundamentally the goal of Zionism. And for those of you who pretend, or those of you reactionaries who act as if Hamas started this, first of all, I must say that Hamas is a violent, bloodthirsty organization, right? Hamas did not start it. Israel started it in 1948 by expelling 750,000 Palestinian people from their own homelands. Violently expelling them, right? You see? Did the Native Americans violently expel the white Americans from America? No, they didn't. Who's in a position of power? The white Americans or the Native Americans? So to conflate Palestinians with white colonial settlers is not only disingenuous, it is egregious, right? Because it's meant to dehumanize them in the eyes of people with progressive left-wing sensibilities. Because if these reactionaries can get people to view Palestinians as settler colonials, well, and not the Europeans that they bring over from America and the European countries, well, then what's going to happen is then we will lose our sympathy and we'll end up supporting the settler colonial state, thinking that the settler colonial state is actually representative of the world's Jewish people, right? But as a matter of fact, no, it isn't, right? It isn't. The settler colonial state of Israel, it has no connection whatsoever with the nation that was established by the mythical King David, right? Because even if King David did exist, he would be disgusted by the culture practiced by the modern, basically the modern westernized Israelis, right? He would be disgusted, yeah. In fact, the real King David, guess what? I'm not a Muslim, but the real King David would probably find Arab Muslim culture more palatable to his taste. Yes, he would find your culture to be too Western, Now, for the most part, Jewish and Arabic people in the land of Palestine coexisted peacefully for centuries before the Zionist Europeans came in, right? And I would even venture a guess that if normal Jewish people like Norman Finkelstein or Gabor Mate were to come back to Palestine, which they don't want to, but if they were, there wouldn't be a problem, right? We wouldn't see all these violent conflicts. But the problem is when you start importing people who are culturally European, with a culturally colonial mentality, a 19th century Victorian colonial mentality, who are not going back, as long-lost brothers, but who are going back with the mindset that they're going to civilize the place, right? And turn it more European. That is how you get the modern state of Israel, right? I'm aware that the modern state of Israel was formed in 1948, but Theodore Herzl is basically its spiritual founder, right? And theoretically, the idea behind Zionism, even as expressed by Herzl, is for a Jewish ethno-state, right? Not a multi-religious, multi-racial country. A Jewish European ethno-state, right? And fundamentally, basically, it's not feasible simply because most Jewish people around the world will not want to uproot themselves and go back to this land that they have no emotional connection to, right? Now, sure, they might have relatives there, but it's not as if they would like to uproot themselves any more than I would like to uproot myself and go back to China, right? The thing is, this is a very painful truth that the diaspora has to swallow, right? It was indeed a very unfortunate event that the Jewish people were kicked out by the Romans almost 2,000 years ago. It was a grave injustice, right? But these people went all over the world, mainly to Europe. They assimilated, and basically, as a result, and this is an inevitable result of migration, they ended up becoming culturally European. I'm referring to the Zionists, right? And so they took on a very European sort of character, right? But the Zionist mantra is basically a land without a people for a people without a land, right? But that is not true. there were millions of Palestinians already living on the land. So what to do? You unpeople the Palestinians, basically. You say that, oh, the Jewish people are people, right? Even European Jewish people who are comfortably living in New York are people. And they have a right to go back to Jerusalem, which is their motherland. But the Palestinian who has lived there for 10 generations, who's now living in a refugee camp, has no right to go back to Jerusalem, right? Where's the logic in that? Help me to understand the logic. They might not have called themselves Palestinians in the past, but they have a much deeper and more abiding to the connection to the land than any westernized European or American can pretend to have, right? So here's the thing. When we say Palestine will be free from the river to the sea, this does not mean that all the Jewish people have to go. Jewish people are native to Palestine, right? That is an incontestable fact. Yes. But I should say real Jewish people are native to Palestine, right? People who claim to be Jewish but who come with a European colonial mentality should not come, right? When Palestine is free from the river to the sea, Jewish and Arabic communities will live together side by side peacefully, as they always had before those Europeans came along. And, you know, the settlers, right? The settlers who do not possess Israeli passports, who possess European passports, right? Who are not born in this land. Well, they can be given a choice. They can choose to either respect the land, respect the customs, and respect the people around them, or they can go back to Europe, right? That is their native land after all, right? It's not their fault that they were born and raised in Europe, but that is the fact of the matter, right? It's not my fault that I was born and raised in Malaysia, but this is just objective truth, right? You know, I can't go back to China because, first of all, I know I'm culturally Malaysian, right? Second of all, I don't want to go back to China. I am going to solve my own problems in this country, right? Rather than go back to China. Even if China were to welcome me back to China, my dream would come at somebody's nightmare, right? Even if I were to go back to China to escape xenophobia in Southeast Asia or in other parts of the world, right? There's xenophobia in Japan and Korea as well. So, in fact, the worst xenophobia comes from Japan. But anyway, even if the Chinese diaspora in Asia or the West were to go back to China, right? There are so many of us, right? Our dream would come at someone's nightmare, right? Someone would have to give up their home for us. And guess who's going to be giving it up? If that were to happen, it's not going to be the Han Chinese who are giving it up, yeah? Right? If the Israeli government were to follow, if the Chinese government were to follow what the Israeli government has been doing since 1948, the ethnic minorities in China would suffer in order for the Chinese to return from their exodus, right? But here's a fact. Here's a fact. You can respect your ancestral customs. You can even hold a Middle Eastern religion like those American evangelicals. But you cannot pretend to be culturally Middle Eastern, right? If you have a Western colonial mentality, right? And unfortunately, Zionists do have a Western colonial mentality. And they really do think that they are civilizing the place, right? Listen to what Benjamin Netanyahu says. He says that, yeah, the Arabs were not doing anything with the land, but we did something with it, which is a very, very colonial sort of mentality, which reeks of white man's burden, right? So yeah, again, Israeli people will no longer be called Israeli people after Palestine is free from the river to the sea. Whatever it will be called, I don't know. But to pretend that the Arabs are going to butcher every Jew in Israel is simply disingenuous, and it simply reeks of a fear of retribution for what you, the Western powers, have done to the Palestinian people for 75 years, right? Because let's not forget, the 6 million Palestinian people who are still stateless today, who still hold the keys to their house, are basically the inconvenient demographic that the West just wants to forget about, right? But we will keep reminding them. The world will keep reminding them, and the world will keep reminding the Zionists that the world does not stand with you in your atrocities against the people of Gaza, right? And yeah, Arab Israelis would be wise to basically support the Palestinian liberation cause, right? Now, there are some Arab Israelis who erroneously believe that they are safe. They are safe because they are citizens of Israel, so they support the state of Israel. Well, here's the thing. You guys are canaries in a coal mine, right? When they no longer need you, when they have created Nakba 2.0 in Gaza, when they no longer need you as cannon fodder or as as for soft power purposes, what are they gonna do to you? They're gonna butcher you guys in cold blood, right? Not they, meaning not the Jews, but the right-wing Zionists, right? They're gonna butcher you in cold blood, right? Because you guys are an inconvenient minority for them. Yes, right-wing Likud politicians, as you are aware, have said the same thing, right? They have made dehumanizing statements about Arabs, right? Time and again. There have been time and again protests in Israel with protesters from the right wing chanting death to Arabs. But then again, they would also want to kill Jewish people who are not on board with their crazy dream, right? Their crazy colonial dream, right? So here's the thing. No, Israel is not defending itself. It is defending its colonial occupation, and the oppressed have a right to rebel, right? And no amount of woke washing from the West is ever going to make the world stand with Israel anymore, because basically you guys have lost the moral high ground, right? In fact, you never had a moral high ground in the first place, because you guys are a country that were created by terrorists in 1948. Thank you.
وبود هاي الافتهادي ضحايا الجوار الثرار بركان الفكر كتكادي هاد ذاكر الفجار هيا نشك الظلام نهاتم القيود شدوا الكون جديرها كونوا أنتم الوجود بجموع الكوية هبوا لها الجفار يا international يواهد البشر بجموع الكوية هبوا لها الجفار لا international يواهد البشر